start.
Okay.
Well,
Hi. Thanks for coming out, everybody. I really appreciate it. I am new to sitting on this side of the table, so forgive any awkwardness that you may encounter from me. I guess briefly, oh gee, just like in a movie, the feedback. That's great.
Bueller.
I don't normally do this, but I'd like to make a dedication. No. I grew up in Dallas, and that's where I first met Wes Anderson about 20 years ago. He was just out of the University of Texas film school, where he had met Owen Wilson and the other Wilson brothers, and they were living in an apartment on Throckmorton in Dallas, and getting a lot of free meals at this place called Cosmic Cup, which was run by a guy named Kumar Pallana, who later showed up in a lot of his movies. And he made a short film called Bottle Rocket. I wrote a little thing about it in the roundup of the USA Film Festival, which was showing it in a program of shorts. And that was the beginning of an association that has lasted on and off for 2 decades. And so that's sort of the personal basis for the book. The artistic basis for the book is I just love the guy's movies. I've been a big booster of his from the very, very beginning. I think people have started to come around to him as a serious director, as a notable, significant American filmmaker in the last couple of years. I feel like Fantastic Mr. Fox and Moonrise Kingdom might have made it official. He always had partisans, he always had boosters, but this sense of him as being somehow maybe in the pantheon or close to being in the pantheon, I think is a fairly new thing. There's nobody like him, and there are a lot of people who, as you know, would like to try to be like him, and they don't quite get there, in my opinion.
Why don't we start with the fact that Wes Anderson is not the type of person who would be here with you to promote this book?
No. Wes, it took me a year just to get him to agree to talk to me for this book. And that's because although Wes is an impresario, you know, he's got a particular way that he dresses and grooms himself, and he appeared in an American Express commercial playing, you know, Wes Anderson, but that's a persona, and in reality, he is basically the same guy that I met 20 years ago, which is he's very shy in a lot of ways, very socially awkward, and I think just like a lot of us, when he goes out in public, he puts on the game face and acts like a guy who's very comfortable in those kinds of situations, but he didn't want to do this book. It took a year to convince him to do this book, and the reason is that he was uncomfortable with the idea of sitting and talking to someone who was doing an entire book about how interesting his films are. And he wasn't kidding, like it wasn't a game. And I think that speaks pretty well of him, that he feels that way.
I have a question. What impelled you to do the book in the first place, which is to say, a more classical way of doing, well, there is, of course, a great precedent for this, which is Truffaut's book on Hitchcock.
Right.
But the more familiar version of the book about the director whose work you've been following for 20 years and love with all your heart is to write a book about him without involving him in the enterprise.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I felt like, well, for one thing, I should say that my editor at Abrams Books, Eric Klopfer, called me out of the blue in 2009, and this was a couple of months after I had done a series of video essays for the Museum of the Moving Image called The Substance of Style, which is a 5-part series of short videos that took apart Wes's style, looked at his influences, and looked at how he transformed them into something that was distinctively his, so that they weren't just references anymore. And Eric was a huge fan of Wes Anderson's films, and he wanted somebody to write a book about Wes Anderson, and he, I guess, happened upon this series and said, hey, maybe this guy wants to write the book. And he said, what do you think about doing this book and maybe finding a way to somehow make a book version of this series of video essays, if that's possible. And somehow, I don't even remember the exact process, but Wes had contacted me to say that he had seen the series of video essays and liked them very much, and he did this, like, it's very hilarious when he does the aw shucks thing, like, I can't believe that anybody would pay that much attention to little old me and my movies, and it's like, you know what, we're both from Texas, so just cut it out.
Enough already, Wes.
And yeah, but it's charming. But then I thought, since I had been in contact with him, I thought, well, maybe I could talk to him, and there could be a critical component, a visual component in the form of stills from the movies, comparisons with other movies, close-ups of books and paintings and other things that had maybe somehow played into it, and then there could be this interview that took us through his career, and that hopefully doubled as a kind of a biography, and not a biography in the sense of when I was 8 years old, I had a puppy named Binky Boo. Like, not that, because he wouldn't have been into that anyway, and I think that's kind of boring. But more like the way American Masters does it, where you're talking about the work, and when the life comes in, it's in relation to the work, where it's sort of the work that's pulling the rest of the train.
Do you want to talk about the title? It seems uniquely Anderson, actually.
Well, I wanted it to be the Wes Anderson something. I didn't know what. But collection seemed appropriate because his movies are filled with people who have a collector's mentality. And he himself has a collector's mentality. And I think his artistic sensibility is that of a collector in the sense that when I've been over to where he lives, and he doesn't live in one place for very long. That's one of the interesting things about him. He keeps moving. There's always a sense of careful balance of disparate elements in his life, and I think his movies reflect that as well. And you get a sense of all these different decades. Like, he loves the 70s American films, he loves 60s sort of European art cinema, he loves older films, classic Hollywood films, French and Italian cinema from the 40s, you name it. And then he's got a very strong literary influence, musical influence, and that's one of the things that I think elevates him above many of his peers, is he's not driven purely by visual media. Whoa!
The gods intervene.
It happens.
One way or the other. We're not sure which yet.
Yeah, it happens to every critic. So let's see.
Hello.
What are we talking about? The influences.
He loves the collections.
Yeah, he does. He loves the collections, and he loves, like, you see the way he dresses. Like, there's something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. That's kind of his thing.
He's always ready to be married.
He is, yeah, as a matter of fact. I went with him to a restaurant when I interviewed him and his girlfriend Juman, and he had a particular, he said, oh, we're going out, and he knew he was going to be seen in public, and there was a chance people would recognize him, and he had to be Wes Anderson. And that was very interesting to see. And basically, he looked like Mr. Fox when he came out. He dressed like Mr. Fox.
That was it. I was in the editing room with him when I was working on the profile of him for the New Yorker, and he and Mr. Fox had the same outfit every day. The same tan corduroy suit.
And in fact, Mr. Fox's, you probably already know this, but Mr. Fox's suit is made from actual pieces of Wes Anderson's suit.
So endearing. Oh my God.
Yeah. So, when you say the director brings something of himself to the character, well,
yeah. I mean, even the shape of the puppets.
Yes.
They're physically, tall and thin.
They are. They're very lean, and of course he acted. And of course I said, you physically acted some of these characters, and he said, oh, I'm not an actor, but there's a videotape. You can actually see it. There's actual videotape, I think, on the DVDs of him, doing the characters for the animators, which is really charming. And so in some cases he's like, wearing some kind of, kimono or like weird like T-shirt with some kind of strange sleeves. I don't know what, but you get a sense of his sartorial sense as well as his acting. It's kind of funny.
But which gets to the heart of the films. It gets to the heart of the question of why his films were received or misreceived for so long. Which is to say that the style element has always been obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Whereas there are people who see the style and don't sense that style is an intensely personal thing.
No, they
don't.
don't.
It's not merely a confection or an amusement, but very much a part of his character and a way and a mode of expression.
Yeah.
And a mode of expressing extremely serious and indeed painful things.
It's true.
One thing it seems like you get into the book is that his relationship to style is so closely connected to him being a child of divorce.
Yeah.
Like, this I can hang on to. This universe I can construct.
Yes. Well, and we talk about that a little bit in the book, and we talked about it some more sort of outside the context of the book, the idea of people defining themselves with their stuff, and how, the things that you own, the things that you buy, the way that you groom yourself. I mean, anybody who writes fiction or makes fiction of any kind understands this, and journalists get this too, but it really becomes externalized in his movies in a way. And I think the Royal Tenenbaums, for me, is the strongest example of this.
Oh, yeah.
And there's something hilarious.
Dalmatian mice.
But it's hilarious and tragic the way that many of these characters are dressed. And like Richie with his, he's still wearing his tennis headband like it's a crown of thorns. It's great.
It's perfect.
Yeah, and then he has to dress the right way to kill himself.
That's right.
He has to groom himself to kill himself.
He does. Yeah, he has to be. He shaves.
And
he shaves.
Gwyneth with her painstaking
I sympathize.
part.
Right. Yes, exactly. With her, and the 46 layers of mascara and the raccoon coat.
This is who I was when I was little. This is who I am now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, this is one of the great things that the book does. I mean, if there was any doubt that the elements of his film are pieces of his life being put in the movies, this will lay those doubts to rest definitively.
Yeah.
I have a question. When you read the book, one of the funniest things is that the moments when it suddenly becomes you more talking than Wes
Right.
is when you put your theories out there.
Yeah. Yes. And he goes,
He goes, shrugs. Anderson shrugs.
Yes.
That said, you were there. Like, how does he feel about there being theories about his work? Does he have theories about his work?
He does, but he doesn't want to think about it too much.
Which is probably smart.
Because, he of all people, like some filmmakers are more self-conscious in the sense of being aware of what they do than others, and he's very aware of what he does. And he's also very precise in what he does. And what you were talking about earlier, Richard, the idea of his precision and his sort of the externalized nature of his storytelling being a strike against him in a lot of people's eyes and making them think that he's somehow frivolous or superficial. I think his actual direction is a big part of that too, because he has, as I say in the book, it's a very, very clean style. He's a very clean style. Like visually, the way he moves the camera, the way he frames a shot, the way he cuts, when he chooses to cut, when he chooses to zoom, all of that stuff, he has a very simple vocabulary. And it's like the way Hemingway writes without adjectives. It's like that. And he doesn't, and I talked to him in the chapter on Fantastic Mr. Fox. I said one of the things that struck me the most about this film was it's animated. Now that it's animated, you can do whatever you want to. You could do that Pixar thing where you start on a close-up of a raisin and you slowly zoom out until you're at the edge of the galaxy. You could do anything on this, and instead it looks like a Wes Anderson movie. Here's the fox, you pan 90 degrees, and there's Mrs. Fox, and you pan this way, and it's like that. And that's just the way his mind works. That's the way his eye works.
The set of Mr. Fox, by the way, ought to have been a museum. I mean, I actually suggested that they preserve it. Because
they didn't preserve it?
No, they did not preserve it. They couldn't preserve it.
No, it was too big. It was too much. It was like a city.
Exactly.
Practically. It was like a little city.
They reconstructed, all of Bath.
Yeah.
And it took width of this room and every building in meticulous detail.
Yeah.
But he also, one of the interesting things that he says in the book is that animation, as much as it liberated him, also constrained him.
Yes.
Because you can't say, well, let's tilt up and see the sky because there's no sky.
Right.
Until you build it.
That's true. And I also appreciated, though, the way that he likes to make everything tactile. He likes to make everything extremely physical.
Yeah.
And even when he was making an animated movie, some of you, if you're here, you may already know this, but he had a bit of a tiff with the animation crew about the fur.
It was drama.
He wanted it to be animal fur. And they said, well, if it's animal fur, you're going to see the thumb impressions, and it's going to look like wind, undulating through the grass when you put all the pieces together. And he said, I don't care, I want animal fur because they used animal fur on King Kong. Willis O'Brien used animal fur on all of his creatures, and he just wanted animal fur. He couldn't even explain why, really. He just wanted it. And but it was partly that. The idea of a personal touch, I said, well, you can sort of see the fingerprints on the creation. He said, well, in this case, literally. You can literally see that. And when you look at footage of the original King Kong, when you see those sort of staccato patterns going across Kong's fur, that's because people were doing this and moving him a little bit.
So, a standard question, but I really want to know the answer. What was the biggest surprise among the answers he gave you? What was the thing that shocked you most about his work that you didn't know before?
Well, the biggest surprise was how open he is to accidents, and in fact, he goes looking for them. And this is a guy who, as you can see from his movies, he's very controlled, he's very meticulous in the way that he puts a story together, lays it out, shoots it, what he puts in the frame, what he leaves out, when he moves the camera, when he cuts, all of this stuff is very, very exact. But he's also looking for accidents, and he goes with the flow in like much, much better than you would think. And one example of that was we talked about one of the many very distinctive sort of signature shots that he has is what I call the dollhouse shot, where he's moving laterally, and it looks like like you're Superman with X-ray vision, and you kind of see into a house or into a boat or what have you.
He actually makes it seem droll every time.
He does. He does make it seem droll. In fact, and he kids himself. There's a shot in the Royal Tenenbaums, Margot, where her models of sets. That's sort of like that's in a way I feel like that's an acknowledgement of what he's doing when he makes those sorts of shots. But he talked about how, I said, so how did you start doing that? And he said, well, in Rushmore, the scene where they do the groundbreaking on the aquarium, they were supposed to shoot facing the other way. They were the shot was going to take place looking out at the football field, and it wasn't going to be a dramatically moving shot. But they got there that morning, it had rained, there had been torrential rain the night before, and it had turned the field into mud. He said, I don't want to point the camera in all this mud, what do we do? Well, we'll turn the camera around and point it toward the bleachers, which isn't as visually beautiful, but we'll move the camera and we'll have a lot of action and people running around. And when he saw the finished product, he said, okay, that worked, and B, I want to do it again, but this time on purpose. And that led to a lot more sort of long, moving, unbroken shots in the Royal Tenenbaums. And then he gets to the Life Aquatic, and he really goes nuts. And he's got an entire boat chopped in half, and the camera's going this way and that way.
That's his thing in that movie.
It is. And the Darjeeling Limited, which has my very, very favorite, it's my favorite shot in a Wes Anderson movie, is that shot where they move through the train. And you're kind of violating all the laws of physics. Like you're not, it's like there's a Natalie Portman in the hotel room from the Hotel Chevalier, but it's not the hotel room, it's on the train. And Bill Murray is in the train compartment, and then there's the family from the village, but they're on the train. And I call it the dream train shot. But the thing I love the most about it, and I didn't know this until I interviewed him, is they actually shot that on a train. They actually shot that on a moving train. They didn't do it on a soundstage. They brought all the actors out to India, and they built this crazy cutaway set on the train, including the tiger in the bushes, which is a puppet from the Jim Henson Creature shop. So they've got a guy with a camera prowling along, goes to this room, goes to that room, goes to that room, goes to that room, gets to Bill Murray. Bill Murray looks, they turn to reveal the tiger in the bushes, and there's the guy with the puppet going, roar. And they're on a moving train, which is insane, and yet it contributes something. Like the peculiar energy of that shot, I agree that having everybody on this train in those awkward, weird, cramped circumstances must have had something to do with the energy of that shot.
Well, reading your book, when I got to that point and you say, you shot it on the train, I heard your voice go up a couple of octaves with surprise.
Yeah.
I mean, that whole film is built on surprise. I mean, the documentary element in the Darjeeling Limited is astonishing. They couldn't control their locations for the most part.
Spirituality, which seems like it. I mean, there's always been a latent spirituality to his films in the sense of the kind of emotional longing that people have, but that film, it's really front and center.
Yeah, it definitely is. And there's a sense of life. Life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans. Seems to be a big thing with him, and that's something, I think that's a factor for everyone if they're a sentient being and they've lived on the earth for any amount of time. But Wes really foregrounds it. He really foregrounds it in a major way.
But it's also a really death-haunted film. I mean, all of his films are death-haunted, but I think Darjeeling Limited...
Yeah. Well, that feeling of life is cheap, which...
Well, the revelation that Owen Wilson had tried to kill himself. I mean, not Owen Wilson, but...
that was a weird
God spare me, but I mean the character.
Yes, right.
That actually, speaking of Darjeeling, that of all his films, that's the one that seems like people get divisive about. I mean, not everyone loves Steve Zissou. Hello.
Yeah.
But but Darjeeling, there were some accusations of cultural tourism that were leveled at it, which you didn't quite ever give him any shit about in your book. And I was curious
we
about
talked
that.
about it when the microphone wasn't rolling.
Right. So do you
there were
want
a
to
lot
talk about that?
Yeah, I'll talk about it a little bit. There were a lot of things we discussed when the microphone wasn't rolling because we weren't on record. And I can summarize it. But yeah, he was stung by that. He was stung by that stuff, and he saw the point. He saw the point, but he also felt like, I'm doing the best I can here. That was his feeling.
Why do you think that you kept the recorder off for that?
Oh, I didn't have it off. We were just eating lunch.
Right.
I mean, like what we would do is we had this particular room where we did the interviews, and we would go sit down, and I had a microphone pointed towards him and a laptop where I was recording, and we would say, all right, we're going to do 1 hour on this and 1 hour on that, and then we're going to break for lunch, or then we're going to go have dinner or take a walk or whatever. But we talked about that. We talked about his parents' divorce in a lot more detail, like really personal detail, which I'm not going to get into because he
It's a
If he
detail.
wanted to say it, in front of the microphone, he would have said it in front of the microphone. And other stuff. I mean, like, the book is about the art for the most part, and he's a very private guy. And there are some directors who would not have that sort of compunction, but even some artistic choices like the action sequences in the Life Aquatic, he got a lot of grief for those. A lot of people thought they were not up to his usual standards, and he told me, not officially in the interview, that there were logistical problems and budget problems that contributed to that, and that was an improvisation as much as the aquarium groundbreaking shot in Rushmore was an improvisation. Like, the reason those scenes are shot in a very handheld, chaotic, sort of almost cubistic way is because he meant to shoot them in a more meticulous way, and it wasn't possible.
I was just thinking about that scene on the way over, actually. Really, because I haven't seen Captain Phillips yet.
Go see it. It's so good. Yeah.
Really?
I will go see it.
surprised.
But,
I'm surprised you say that.
So
but
good.
I was reading Manola Douglas's review in the Times, which already went up online, and she was talking about the emphasis of the film, which was to depict the point of view of the hijackers as well, their motives, their situations at home that led them to hijack a boat. Right. You watch the hijacking scene in Life Aquatic. Bill Murray goes to get him, and when he gets him, he pumps his fist.
Right.
And then in other words, it's, and I think that talking about, he's spoken of his affinity for the 70s. One of the things he said to me, and this is he thinks of making films on the subject of riding bicycles without helmets.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
The idea being that, people should indeed, these are his characters, should be actively seeking adventure, taking the risks that go into seeking adventure, the risks to themselves and to others.
Yes, that's true. I mean, I like that he, and I think this is in the book, he talked about how the Life Aquatic came about. I interviewed him in Tuscany, and he has, I'm still a little unclear, I think, and he would rather that I stay unclear on it, as to what his living arrangements are. Like, is there any place where he actually is his main place where he lives? But he's in London right now. There was a period where he was in Paris. I mean, you may know a little more about this, but he just likes to travel.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, he was touring to promote the Royal Tenenbaums. And that was the first film of his that had international success, and he was at these international film festivals. And he is a Texas boy, and L.A. and New York were, oh my God, look at these international cities. And then he got abroad, and it was an exponential expansion of his consciousness. And he decided, I don't want to spend the rest of my life in the United States. I don't want to live here year round and go to another country for two weeks or something. I want to see the world. And that's why he shot The Life Aquatic in Rome, because he was in Rome at the time and said, oh my God, Rome, Fellini shot here. There's a studio here. This doesn't have to be set in America. I'll set it somewhere else. I'll shoot it in Rome because I've always wanted to, that was sort of his mentality. And the Darjeeling Limited, they hashed out the plot of it, him and Roman Coppola and Jason Schwartzman on a train going through France, I think. And, I think they did some in New York and then in France, and then ultimately it settled in India. And the reason it settled in India was he went to see a screening of The River, a restored version of The River. I think Martin Scorsese invited him to come see it. And he came out of it and said, I'm going to set my next movie in India. So this is the control freak Wes Anderson. This is how his mind works. He comes out of the screening, it's like, you know what, forget it. It's not going to be in France. I'm going to set it in India because India looks interesting.
Well, and you kind of nailed that in your interviews with him as well, that you'd say over and over, it seems like, well, what caused you to make this film? And he'd be like, I don't know, I wanted to make a movie about school.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he does.
That's right. The piece, it's as if, rather than having a recipe, he had a lot of ingredients.
That's right.
Yeah, and those people have to be meticulous because otherwise they're lost.
Yep, that's true. One thing I have noticed is in the course of doing this for a couple of decades, one thing I have noticed that all of the directors have in common who have been doing it for a very long time and have managed to make films continuously for more than 10 years is they're very organized. They're all very organized, and they don't have a lot of unnecessary stuff in their lives. And this is true of like a lot of directors, like not just Wes Anderson, but a lot of other directors whose homes or workspaces I have been in for any length of time. They're clean. They don't look like this. They don't have 10,000 books. They have like 10, and they don't have pictures over every inch of the wall. They have 3 pictures.
They're curators.
Yeah, they're curators, exactly, and collectors, as it were. Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah, see what I did?
I see where you went with that.
Yeah.
So we are running just a little bit low on time, and we're going to move on to the question and answer portion of the evening. So if you have any questions for our lovely panel, please raise your hand. I'm going to bring the microphone over to you. Is there anybody else?
Hello. Once again, it was very nice to meet you. I am currently a student at New York University. I go to Tisch for film and television. And I actually already finished your novel, like I told you. And I wanted to know personally from you which film of Mr. Anderson's resonated best with you personally. Set aside the critic job and think personally which one most affected you personally, I would say. That's it.
The Life Aquatic. The Life Aquatic, without a doubt. And that was a movie that hit me. I saw it when it came out, which was Christmas of 2004, and I liked it quite a bit. And it was on my top 10 list at New York Press that year. I think it was like my number 4 movie of the year.
What was ahead of it?
Oh, geez. Hero. And God, what else? Maybe The Incredibles, although I'd probably rank that slightly lower now.
Incredibles is awesome.
It's a great movie. That was a good year.
Yeah.
2004 was a really good year for movies. Anyway, but I saw it again a couple of years after my wife's death, and the theme of trying to kill death resonated for me very strongly. And I told him, when I talked to him, when he called me about the video, to say he liked the video essay series and thanked me for doing it, I told him, thank you for making The Life Aquatic, and I proceeded to tell him why. And I was very emotional. And Wes, being Wes, his response was, he said, thank you very much.
We have another question back here.
Hi there. It seems like one of Wes's best traits is the ability to get really good performances out of children. Could you talk to that point a little?
Oh, there you are, yeah. Yeah, I've seen him direct. I saw him direct on the set of Bottle Rocket, his first feature. And the way he directs reminds me of, and maybe you can speak to this as well, the way that Woody Allen is said to direct, which is he doesn't give a lot of direction. And he's not micromanaging the performances. It's more about the casting for him. And in the same way that Woody Allen will, and there was a wonderful American Masters documentary on Woody Allen where one of the actors, I can't remember which one, talked about how Woody Allen barely said anything to him in the way of direction during the whole movie, and then at one point he was having trouble in a particular scene, and Woody Allen came up and said one sentence that locked everything into place, and that seemed to be the way that Wes does it. But he looks for people who get him for one reason or another, and I think that's why his floating repertory company includes some very accomplished actors who have been doing it for a long time, like Angelica Houston and Bill Murray and Willem Dafoe and people like that, and Bud Cort, who he sought out because he's a big Hal Ashby fan, but also people like Kumar Pallana, who, he used to be the proprietor of the coffee shop where he and Wes would go to try to get free muffins.
Seems like they weren't very successful.
Yeah, there's something about people. He likes particular people. It's just it's who knows why, but I think it's more of a people thing. I think it's less of an aesthetic thing and more of a people thing for him.
Well, there's that great line that you elicited from him in the book when he said, "There isn't a lot of improvisation in my movies." He said, the text is what we shoot, but the improvisation is the performance.
Yes. Yes, and I thought that was a very eye-opening thing to hear, because we do think of one of the things that filmmakers get in Q&As. Pretty much anybody who makes a movie that has quasi-naturalistic dialogue gets this: how much of the dialogue is improvised? And that's always it's always an impossible question to answer, because as Wes pointed out in that chapter, it's possible to have everything scripted down to the syllable, yet there's still an incredible amount of improvisation in the performance. Just because you're not making up the words that come out of your mouth doesn't mean, look at how Shakespeare is performed. Look at how many different ways there are to perform one monologue from a Shakespeare tragedy, and you can see what Wes is talking about, I think.
This is what we started talking about backstage that we said we shouldn't talk about until we get on stage.
True.
Yeah.
Right? Well, we were talking about how Bill Murray's image changed, how Bill Murray essentially became a hipster god because of Rushmore.
No, essentially Wes Anderson excavated him.
Because of Rushmore.
Yeah.
He excavated him.
And I have this little idea, and I don't think I'm alone in having it, that in effect, not the actor, him or herself, but actors are made by directors. Bill Murray made a lot of really nice movies before Rushmore.
Meatballs is awesome.
But
yeah.
Wes Anderson found something in him that nobody else found in him.
Yes.
And that's true of a lot of the people who have acted in Wes Anderson's movies, that he either discovered them, as in the case of Jason Schwartzman or the young people in Moonrise Kingdom, or he transformed them into something entirely other than what we were used to seeing them as.
Well, I always joke that Clooney's never been sexier than when he played a fox. And he was, I think it was actually Anderson who realized that the key to Clooney is his voice.
Yes, he said that. He said that in the interview, that it was his voice, and that was why he said the fox has got to be George Clooney.
Swoony Clooney.
Because of the voice, yeah. But I think that's true. And about Bill Murray, I asked him what were the Bill Murray films that made you think I want to work with Bill Murray, and he named not the obvious like Stripes and Ghostbusters and things like that, which are the movies that played 650 times on cable when we were kids, but The Razor's Edge,
Right.
which I don't know if anybody here's seen The Razor's Edge, but that was a movie that Bill Murray, that was a labor of love for him that I think he did as a condition of also doing Ghostbusters.
And no one knew what to do with it at the
No
time.
one knew what to do with it because it was not a comedy. I mean, it was funny, but it was not a comedy, and he was playing a man in spiritual torment, really. And it's interesting to me that Wes, who I think saw that in college, like imagine 19, 20-year-old Wes Anderson watching The Razor's Edge on VHS and going,
Be like.
yeah.
We have time for another question back here.
Hi. You kind of spoke to the question I had about dialogue, but in regards to editing, because he's so precise, and there is not a lot of coverage, if at all, a lot of times, like, does he ever have like an elaborate setup where he's like, it is just dragging, or it's too slow, or it's not getting the energy I'm going for? Did he ever kind of talk about that, or did he kind of able to speed it up or jump cut it in ways that it could still be used?
Well, in those shots that are a long shot where he's kind of cutting by moving the camera rather than by cutting, which is sort of an old movie way of directing. Those are heavily choreographed, and once you commit to it, if you've ever tried to do a shot like that, you know that once you commit to it, you have to make it work. You have to make it work, and if you can't make it work, you've got to try to shoot it in a less clever way. And he has done that, and he does do coverage. He does do coverage as a safety. Particularly on one of those shots, he'll go back and get particular moments in close-up just in case, because otherwise you run into a situation like, did anybody see the Martin Scorsese film Casino?
It's the best movie.
Well, there's a lot of shots in there where you see characters talking and the camera's it's panning between them, and there are these dissolves.
Right.
And a friend of mine who's a filmmaker happened to be walking down the street one day, and he recognized Thelma Schoonmaker, Martin Scorsese's editor, which is funny in itself. Oh my God, it's Thelma Schoonmaker!
Autograph.
And he walked to her, and he walked with her for several blocks and asked her all these, because when am I going to be walking next to Thelma Schoonmaker again? And he asked her, he said, in Casino, he said, I got a question, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but what's up with all the dissolves in Casino and the dialogue scenes? And she actually blushed and went like this. And she said, Marty wanted to shoot these very elaborate dialogue sequences with no takes, but the problem was the actors were good at different times during the day. Like De Niro would be good at the beginning, and Sharon Stone would be good at the end, and the energy would be mismatched. And he
When
said
the drugs were kicking in at different points.
Exactly right.
Just saying.
And they had to they couldn't, it just wasn't working. So in the editing room they would just cut it up and put dissolves in there, and she said it was just like, well, let's act like we meant to do this. So even Scorsese has to go with Plan B sometimes.
You know, one of the things he told you in the book was that because of the difficulty of getting everybody together on the same long take, sometimes he'd do 12, 15 takes because that's how long it took for everybody to get it right. But
Yeah.
I asked him the same question actually, and I got a slightly different answer. He said he had the same situation of sometimes this actor would be better on takes 1 through 4, and the other
Yeah.
one would be better on takes 7 through 12. He said, that shot in Darjeeling Limited, where the two guys are sitting side by side and having this long dialogue in one static frame? And I said, yeah, sure. He said, this is, Adrian Brody take 3, and that's, Jason Schwartzman take 7. He said, we figured out that we could digitally split and marry 2 different takes. So it doesn't look like an effect, but it is. And then he said, like in The Whole Town's Talking, the John Ford film where Edward G. Robinson
Right,
plays
right.
2
Oh my
different
God, yeah.
characters in the same frame.
Yeah, he's very good about the sort of backyard. I call it the backyard Super 8mm solution to problems. And the Fantastic Mr. Fox, there's a lot of that kind of stuff in there where if he has a character, you're looking out this way and a character is coming over a hill and then coming over another hill and walking into a close-up. He's got a Mr. Fox who's this big, another Mr. Fox who's that big, and then the one in the background is like that big. And if you're actually looking at the movie, if you're looking closely at the movie, you can tell. Because the one that's this big looks like a raisin with arms, and he's kind of.
But it's weird seeing the seams like that only renders it more endearing.
It does, yeah, it absolutely does.
That's exactly right. Like if you don't know, you won't know. But once you know,
You're like, I'm
you
in
know,
on this, and
then
I
you're-
like
that's
this
right.
illustrated book.
Well, in Moonrise Kingdom, there's special effects in Moonrise Kingdom. The flood is a miniature. The flood that destroys the camp is a miniature. You can tell it's miniature water.
yeah.
I love that about it, and I asked him about that, and he said, well, I said, you could have done it CGI, and he said, yeah, but my attitude is, it's going to look fake no matter what I do if it's not a real flood. Like, do I want it to look fake as CGI, or do I want it to look fake as a miniature? He said, I prefer the miniature. That was his attitude.
When make it a diorama, he does.
That's right. Yeah,
We have
I
time
picture
for-
him as a little kid, like doing dioramas with army soldiers and
It's
stuff.
awesome.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. Is there anybody from this side or over there? Other one on this.
This is like the side of the wedding that is quieter.
Right.
Hello. I was wondering if you have future plans to expand on this as Wes's film catalog grows, like with the Grand Budapest right now
Yeah.
that he's got, and then obviously who knows in the future.
I hope so. I mean, that's in terms of adding to it with interviews. That's if he wants to participate, I'm certainly game for that. And in fact, Moonrise Kingdom was a last-minute addition to the book. Wes, it's funny. Wes is very, as you can imagine, he's very circumspect about letting people know things that they ought to know and not letting people know things that they don't necessarily need to know. And I interviewed him in Tuscany. I did most of the interviews for the book in August of 2010. And while I was there, he was finishing the final draft of Moonrise Kingdom, which he was going to shoot within a few months. And I think it was a few days after I left, there was an announcement that his next movie would be Moonrise Kingdom. And the whole time I was there, like when he wasn't talking to me, he was going off into his room and finishing final revisions on Moonrise Kingdom. I had no idea. So he could be working on yet another film for all we know.
Right, we have one from this side.
Could you talk about his relationship to music in his films?
Yeah,
That's a good question.
a lot. There's a chapter. Well, in fact, in the Moonrise Kingdom chapter is actually my favorite chapter of the book because that's the chapter where we're basically covering all the stuff that we forgot to cover in the rest of the book. So it's all jumbled up, and we kind of go off in a million different directions. And I think there's like 3 or 4 whole pages about music in that chapter, and he talks about movies that he thinks use existing music really well, and also his relationship to particular pieces of music like Ravel's String Quartet in F major, the second movement of which plays in the Royal Tenenbaums, and he told me that was he bought a CD when he was in college of Maurice Ravel's music, and it sparked in him this image of a story set in New York in the 1960s, which later became the Royal Tenenbaums. Just listening to String Quartet in F major made him imagine what later became the Royal Tenenbaums. So he's strongly, strongly influenced by music, and the scene where Margot gets off the bus in the Royal Tenenbaums, that was sparked by listening to that song. And that was, he said, the first complete scene that he imagined in the Royal Tenenbaums was that scene, and it was sparked by music. And music is it's, you know, as you know, a huge deal for him. As big a deal as for somebody like Scorsese or Spike Lee or Quentin Tarantino.
Wonderful. Well, I know my favorite Wes Anderson song scene was definitely in Bottle Rocket. We have the love scene between Inez and Luke Wilson's character. That's actually how I discovered the band Love. So I feel like he was really influential in my music catalog as well.
What's the Devo song that plays when in Life Aquatic where he's... There you go. I love that because that's a deep cut. Like that's not one of the obvious ones. And I remember seeing that in a theater, and that piece of music came on. There were 3 or 4 people in this big theater who just started laughing in affirmation at that, and it was like the Devo fans are in that.
Or also the Kink song in Darjeeling. I know 3 people who used that for their wedding after that. I was like,
did they run in slow motion to the altar?
I love you.
Wonderful. I think we do actually have time for one more. Okay.
I have one for Matt.
Yeah.
You said it took over a year,
Yeah.
Wes, to agree to do the book.
Yeah.
What was your motivation to keep trying over and over, and what was the final green light that made him agree?
I don't really remember. I just know that at one point, and I actually discussed at several points with my editor and my agent that maybe I'll just go ahead and do the book as a critical, like just a critical analytical book, and Wes won't be involved, and that'll be fine. You know, it'll be a different kind of book, but. And so I was fully prepared to go on without him, but then he decided to do it, and who knows why. I mean, Wes, as you can tell from reading the book, Wes will entertain your theories, but he's not too big on explaining himself. He likes it that way. And I don't think it's just that he wants to appear mysterious. I really feel that there's an aspect of, like he's a trapeze artist, and if he thinks about what he's doing too much, he's going to fall off the wire, that's maybe where he's coming from, and I can respect that.
It's interesting, though, that you didn't interview anybody else with whom he's been working. Had you entertained the idea?
I did, and in fact, I went so far as to reach out to a few people, but then I thought, why this person and not somebody else? You know, what is this really going to add to the book? Like, it's, you know, I mean, I felt like I was like, I should interview a cinematographer. Well, if I do that, I should interview the music supervisor. And then suddenly it becomes a DVD supplement in book form, and I thought, no, I'm just going to simplify this.
How much did he have to do with the collections you chose to represent in the book, though?
What do you mean, the actual pieces of art?
Yeah, and
that's all me and my editor. And
did he supply them to you?
A few things. A few. He helped us get some things. There are not a lot of things that are. In fact, it's funny. There's actually a lot of the sort of objects that are like personal objects are more likely to be my objects than his. That cell from A Charlie Brown Christmas was given to me by Charles Schultz after I interviewed him back in 1995. And the copies of all the Salinger books are family copies. They're all dog-eared and stuff. And yeah, in fact, there were a few personal things that were sort of included in things that he gave to us that didn't make it into the book, because they were just too personal. Like there were some pictures of him and his brother when they were little kids that I really wanted to put in the book. But at the last minute he said, I can't put this in the book. So, you know, I didn't ask why. He had his reasons.
Oh, well, thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you especially to Lisa, Matt, and Richard. This has been lovely. If you haven't already, make sure you check out a copy of the Wes Anderson Collection before you leave. Take care.